Genevieve, hi.
Hello.
How much can I borrow?
That's a very broad question, Glenn.
It is. Have you got an example for us?
I do. So if you're a single on 100K with a HECS debt, your borrowing capacity sits around the 450, 500K mark.
And are you saying 450 to 500K because that's a range that could vary between lenders?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, based on certain lenders. And then if you're a first home buyer within that, you would need around a 5% deposit. So let's say about 30K
Yep.
to cover 25K as a 5% deposit plus then costs of that.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And then a couple?
So I've got a couple here, 100K. One's on 100K with a HECS and one's on 80K no HECS. Your borrowing capacity is sitting around that 800, 850 mark.
Right.
Depending on what state you're buying in, the deposit obviously can vary because you're in stamp duty territory with some states. So I would say you would want to start with at least 50 to 60K.
So
there.
in terms of, because it can be confusing for some people because they'll be like, well, how much can I borrow? And you've said, okay, a couple, we've got a 180K household income,
Yep.
about 850, but that's not the purchase price, is it?
No, it's not. So, I mean, your deposit on top of that can contribute, but you've got to allow for that 5% deposit.
Yes.
Plus then any costs. But say if your borrowing capacity was 500 and you had 40,000, you could purchase for around that 535 mark.
Yeah, okay, cool.
But yeah, it's definitely a question that's to your scenario. So you can sort of narrow that down with your broker or lender.
Yeah, because I said to Genevieve, oh, can you just do a couple of scenarios? You know, the median income for people who listen to this podcast is $100,000.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would have help debt. So just on that, we talked about deposit. If it was a first home purchase, we'll just assume for this discussion that there is no stamp duty.
Yep.
You're under a threshold, but we still need some type of security because the bank need some type of security or recourse. So if you don't pay and they come to take the house and the house is dropped, they're going to be out of pocket.
Yes.
So this is where LMI walks in the door, which is the lender's mortgage insurance,
Yes.
and also the first home buyer guarantee, the government scheme.
Yes. So if you're a first home buyer, you can use the scheme, and it's basically where the government goes guarantor for you for the 5% and you don't pay any mortgage
For the
insurance.
15%.
No, so they basically waive your mortgage insurance. So you just put up 5% deposit, no mortgage insurance.
Yeah, but so ordinarily if you had a 5% deposit,
Yes,
you would need LMI.
correct.
So the government just steps in because
Yep.
the LMI would be covering that 15%.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
To stay out of lender's mortgage insurance, you generally need a 20% deposit. So, yes, the government sort of makes up that difference in the background in all their paperwork.
Yeah. And that's the thing. So the annoying thing about the lender's mortgage insurance, it's a cost that you have to pay for, and most people borrow that anyway.
Yeah, so generally what happens, say you weren't a first home buyer and you did have a 5% deposit, the bank will lend you 95% including the mortgage insurance. So then technically you need more than a 5% deposit because say they're lending you 92% and
Yeah.
then the mortgage insurance caps you up to the 95%.
Yeah, so if you do have that 5% deposit and you want LMI, the LVR ends up being about 92% loan.
Yep.
And
Yeah, so I would say you need more than 5% if
Yeah.
you are going into lender's mortgage insurance.
yeah, I reckon just as a good guide, like if someone called you today after listening to this episode and be like, hey, Genevieve, I want to buy a first home, or we want to buy our first home.
Yep.
How much do we need to save? Do you tell them, look, just call me back when you've got 5% of the purchase price and then we've got options?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's just so many different policies now as well, and so many different avenues that we can go down. I know we'll probably talk about it, but there's like parental guarantee, the government scheme, although your income might be over the threshold for you to use that. Are you a doctor? Are you a nurse?
Are you a butcher, a baker, or
Yeah, like
candlestick
there
maker?
honestly is so many scenarios. So even if you weren't sure how much of a deposit you need or you weren't quite there yet, I just still think it's helpful to reach out and get a guideline as to where you need to be. Because that 5% of a purchase price could be very broad. Like your ideal purchase price might be $950, but you might not be able to borrow that as well.
Yeah, because that kind of goes down. There's two parts of the mortgage coin, right? It's how much you can borrow based on your income,
Yep.
and then have you got security?
Yeah.
Be it deposit, be it parental guarantee, be it the government 5% deposit scheme.
Yep.
And it's all well and good and at the time, we are recording this mid-April. It's before the election. The government both sides of parties have announced they're going to tweak that scheme, increase the income thresholds, remove all the caps effectively, and increase the asset purchases in the capital cities and all that. But it still remains that only solves one side of the coin.
It does.
Like,
Yep.
all well and good, you might have been gifted 50 grand or
Yeah.
100 grand. All well and good, you can use that 5% scheme,
Yep.
but you don't meet the income requirements to get the loan.
And with the scheme, because a lot of people do get gifted funds, you need to have it genuinely saved. So you either need to hold those funds in your account for at least 3 or more months, or you need to show that you can genuinely put away a certain amount of savings for that 3 months, or you can show a rental ledger.
You're amazing. You know why?
Why?
I just wrote down rent before you said rental ledger because I was going to ask you about that. So some banks and lenders that you work with
Yep.
will see rent consistently paid, not overdue and all that
Yep.
as a
Genuinely saved.
saved.
Yep.
Yeah. So they know that you have discipline in your life.
Correct. Yeah. So
pay
they
the
sort of
mortgage.
have a tick box of things that they need to tick off. And although you have the 5%, but it was gifted, you can then show that you've genuinely paid rent for the last 3 months, 6 months, whatever that may look like.
Yeah, cool. And then if someone was like, we don't own a home yet, but we want to continue to live in Honeysuckle next to Glen on Newcastle Harbour.
Who wouldn't want to do that?
It's really nice.
Yeah. I'm jealous.
But I want to buy an investment property.
Yep.
You will generally need to save, 10%? Because the first home buyer guarantee schemes with the government,
You can't use
you
it.
can't use.
No.
Now, talk to us. If you were earning more than the income thresholds for the government schemes,
Yep.
all government schemes, and you only had a 10% deposit for your first home,
Yep.
and you talked about different occupations, some banks have the lender's mortgage insurance waiver.
Yeah, so certain banks have different medical policies, or if you're a vet, or all different qualifications, accountants, you can borrow up to 90% of what the property's worth and not pay mortgage insurance.
Yeah.
If you do have 10% and you do have a degree, I would say reach out to your broker and talk about those options as well.
And I think a broader thing, anyone, when you are talking to your bank or lender, or you call your mortgage broker a mortgage broker or Genevieve, ask 100%, does my occupation meet the criteria for an LMI waiver?
Yes.
Because recently they've just added paramedics.
Yeah,
Some
so many.
banks. Yeah.
And I think it's just that you have to understand that only certain lenders do those. So,
So if you walk into Westfield to a branch and
Yeah.
you're like, LMI waiver, they're like, what?
yeah, so only certain lenders, like as an example, for an OT, you can only really go to Westpac or St. George for
Right.
that policy. Like, it's very niche. So I think it's just worth engaging with a broker to have all those options on the table.
And this is what we need to understand, and the value of going to a mortgage broker. Don't just Google best interest rate mortgage.
No.
Because what if you could get a
waiver.
loan with no LMI, saving $15,000, but pay one bee's nipple more for interest with that bank?
Exactly.
I'm taking the bee's nipple.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I just think I worked it out for a client yesterday. We're trying to refinance her off a higher rate, and it was going to cost her $11,000 in mortgage insurance to refinance because she wasn't quite there yet.
Yeah.
But she wasn't going to save $11,000 on her interest rate. So I was like, you're
do
just
it.
better off staying as is for
And
now.
That's a good point. If you have to pay lenders mortgage insurance, that's one-time payment to that bank or lender. If you go and move banks or lender and as your
You're stealing
client,
mortgage insurance.
you've got to pay it again.
You do.
Unless
Yeah.
the property's increased in value, you've paid down the loan, and you're in that 80% vibe. Awesome. Well, we're doing a bit of a refresher today on the home loan process, particularly around first home buyers. I just want to always acknowledge that people are new to our podcast. And actually, I've been toying everyone. I might put in brackets at the end of the episode title, B for beginner.
Or bee's nipple.
Or bee's nipple. Hey, bingo. Anyway, my name's Glen James. This is a podcast, and it is brought to you by Sphere Home Loans. Genevieve is an employee and mortgage broker of Sphere Home Loans. She was on the show a couple of weeks ago sharing her story around mat leave, parental leave, returning to work, all the fun stuff.
All things kids.
All things kids. You can have a look at that. Otherwise, we're going to do a podcast. My name's Glenn. I've said that. Let's get it on. You're listening to Money, 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 or as the regulars like to call it, M3. We're Australia's OG personal finance podcast. Everything you hear on the show is general advice only, which I'm licensed to give, and details can be found in the show notes. My name's Glen James, former financial advisor, now podcaster. I've got a book, The Quick Start Guide to Investing, and I host, produce, and curate this podcast with you in mind. You can follow me on Instagram, just search Money Podcast, or if you want to join the Facebook group, just put this episode number on your way in so we know you're real and not spam. Otherwise, thanks so much for listening. Let's do this.